Sorry, Raghav is also down.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Because of this, we are connected. Is there a network issue here? Because we're not getting any call. Leave it, they will come. Can't keep time, we can wait for them.
Okay, I'm just going to start now. So, good morning. Thank you for coming to the first webinar hosted by FFE and Geogen Next. So, firstly, I'd like to start by thanking FFE, which is Forum of Free Enterprise. It was established 62 years back, I believe. Started by a great man, Mr. A.D. Shroff, and the legacy was carried forward by another great man, Mr. Manny Palkiola. It's wonderful to have your support, Swati, and thank you for making this happen. And thank you to Raghav as well, who's a council member of FFE. I'd like to just start by giving a small introduction to what Geogen Next is all about, and what I do out here. So I basically run Geogen Next, which is a startup mentoring program of Reliance Industries. What we do is that we look at startups and we incubate startups out here, and we help them basically present their ideas to our internal business unit leaders. The idea behind Geogen Next is to help them win strategic partnerships with Reliance Industries and our companies. So that's primarily what we do. We've worked with over 100 companies so far over the last 4 years. The sort of enterprise valuation of these companies is in excess of $500 million today. So we've seen a fair bit of success with a lot of companies. And thanks to the team out here also who have sort of joined us and made it happen today. So Divya, Subhashi, Anirudh, I'd like to acknowledge your presence as well, and thank you for making this event happen. Welcome to all of you all as well. So we're just getting started, and the whole idea today is to actually talk about startups and also hear from you what your views are about startups and if you have any questions about startups as well. Actually, we originally called this forum Startup 101, Key Ingredients of Building a Startup. I think, based on the responses that we saw, I feel that, we should have called this webinar actually getting started, because a lot of young students want to know how to get started with a startup. So in hindsight, we should have actually called it getting started, because there are, two big questions that everybody is asking. The first question is how to find a problem, or in other words, how to find an idea. And the second is how to find money to build that idea. So these are two big questions that students want to learn from. So I think what I'd like to do is to start with telling you all what a startup is not, and why doing a startup cannot be taught. Many of you all are going to management institutions where essentially management education is taught, and there are innovation and entrepreneurship programs as well. But entrepreneurship is not something that you can learn in an academic institution. Entrepreneurship is something you learn by actually doing it. Startup is something that you learn by just doing it. So one needs to actually just do a startup to learn how to do a startup, right? There is no formula out here. Unlike in college, where you have frequently asked questions that you kind of go through before you go for an exam. There are no frequently asked questions that you can prepare for when you're doing a startup. you have to take it one day at a time, and you have to build your idea one day at a time, right? So that is the biggest takeaway. So there are no tricks, there are no cheats. It's a very very hard journey. It's a long journey, and the good part about doing a startup is that you can make a lot of mistakes, and you can fail multiple times, and it is okay to fail while doing your startup. It's not that if you fail once or twice in implementing your idea, it is your life is over. So that's the fun part about doing a startup. That's what drew me towards doing a startup myself. That one could actually learn from failures and mistakes, and one could actually celebrate them, right? So that is a very important thing that one must sort of keep in mind, and which is why it is so much fun. So what can be taught about a startup, right? That is also important to know, and it is mostly behavioral science. That's the only thing that can be taught, right? So, for example, what does GeoGenX do out here, right? We teach you how to listen to your customers because they are the most important stakeholders in your business. If you don't have customers, you don't have a business, right? How do you sort of network, and how do you build relationships? That is also very very important skill set that not a lot of management educational institutions or other real life experiences teach you. So that is something that we teach out here. The other thing is how to present your ideas, because you might have a brilliant idea, you might have a brilliant team, but unless you are able to make that impression on the customer that this is brilliant, it is of no use, right? So this is something that accelerators do very actively, which is to help you, present your ideas if it is not very intuitively clear to you how to present them. And also, I think we ask a lot of right questions about your business, right? Whether it is a business at all, or it is just a hobby, or whether it is just an idea that you came out with that you want to do, right? So I think an accelerator and incubator's role is in asking all the right questions, and is not in really helping you run your startup. It is really in sort of helping you along the way with the right questions, and helping you make the right connections. But end of the day, the startup has to be built solely by you. So I think that is, having said that, if one has to actually, you know, uh, sort of come to an accelerator and try and build a startup, what does one need to bring to the table in the first place, right? So it's very important to understand what is required from you all. So one is that a lot of common sense is needed, right? Because without common sense, it's very difficult to convince, anybody of anything. So common sense is required. Loads of it is required, and it's not such a difficult thing to have, right? In this world, common sense is very very easy to have. Uh, Humility is the other thing that I feel is very important. Humility to you know have an open mind, listen to people, take their feedback in the right spirit, act on that feedback. So if you're not humble, nothing will really actually, you know, go in really in terms of feedback. So open mind, humility. I think, but the most important thing as an entrepreneur is determination, because you're going to face a lot of failures and face a lot of mistakes. And if you give up too easily, then it's of no use. It was no use of starting a startup in the first place. So determination to keep going is the most important thing that I feel one needs to have. And lastly, I would say that as an accelerator, as mentors, advisors, or even as investors, we need to see excitement in your tone for running your business. Because if you come to us and show us that this is something you're doing out of compulsion, right? And there is really no need for this startup to exist, and there is no excitement in your tone about your own startup, then it kind of drives investors away, it drives mentors and advisors away. So we need to sense a tone of excitement in your in you. The next thing that I'd like to focus on is, and this was one of the most popular questions that was asked in the application form, which is, how do you find a problem, right? Or in other words, how do you find an idea? And there are a couple of pointers that I'd like to give, because this is a uh, very individualized kind of a question, right? There is no one size fits all as far as this question is concerned, right? But there are a few things that can help you in finding your idea. So the first thing is expertise. Um, you need to have some expertise. Like, as a group out here in GenNext, we have expertise in running an accelerator program. So we can repeat batches. We can do the batches quite well. We can improve the success and the outcome of every startup that comes into the program, or at least a large number of startups that come into the program. So expertise is something that is very important, more than experience. So, uh, what I would say is, expertise. For example, if you look at Google, right? When Larry Page started Google, he had expertise in search, right? Search was something that he was doing as a PhD student in Stanford, right? And that really helped them actually take the search engine to a level where, you know, their servers were crashing, and they continue to build it, and users continue to come to use the search engine. And at some point in time, that expertise actually turned into a business, right? When they had to continue serving their users. So if you look at Larry Page, I mean, he had expertise in search. If you look at Sachin and Vinny Bansal, right, of Flipkart, they had expertise in e-commerce, right? That is a very specific expertise that they brought to the table. They understood how to build a marketplace, right? So, normally we try to think in terms of, oh, can I code, or can I do business? But it is really, what are you most passionate about, and what is the expertise that you have in a particular area, right? And a lot of times, expertise is expressed in the form of a side project that you're doing while in college, right? Or while you're even working, right? A side project can even become a startup at some point in time. So, for example, if you look at the WhatsApp founder, Jan Koum, right? Jan Koum actually started WhatsApp in a very different way, right? It was a side project, and what he thought to himself is that, wouldn't it be a cool idea if in my address book I were to get to know who is available, who's busy, who's in the gym, whose battery is low. So against the names in my address book, I would get a status of every individual person, right? So he started. He thought to himself, and at that point in time, I think it was 2009 when iPhone was launched. He thought to himself that, this is a cool idea, and I will build a backend. But he needed an iPhone developer, so he went to rent a coder. He found a developer who could write an iPhone app, right? And he started sort of making. I mean, that kind of feature started becoming viral. That app became viral, and people started understanding each other's status, right? And then you could ping the person based on availability, and that person would get to know. At some point, one started seeing small messages being exchanged. How are you? What are you doing, etc. Right? From there, the idea of building a messenger came. And at that point in time, there was BlackBerry, there was Gtalk, there were a couple of other messengers, right? So it's not like there were no messengers in the market. But he found a unique way where you could use a phone number to start messaging people, right? So it started as a a small side project. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to start a startup, and I'm going to build a startup, I'm going to raise money, I'm going to go to a venture capital firm. It started as something very small. So you have to be open about such things. You have to be extremely self-aware. You have to observe quite a lot around you, and you have to think of things in the smallest ways, and then see if it can blossom into an enterprise, right? So that is one of the ways in which you can go about it. But the other way that you can go about it is to solve a personal problem that you are having yourself, right? So we had a startup called Genie, which is a voice-based user interface solution. And Genie's founders, Kushagra and Sahil, thought of a very simple idea. They said that uh, my mom can't use essentially anything outside of WhatsApp today, right? WhatsApp is the only thing that is extremely usable as far as my people like my mother are concerned. What if I were to build a way for uh, my mom to navigate any app that is there on App Store or Play Store, right? Uh, but that is a very, very hard problem to solve because every app is designed in its own unique way, right? There is a drop down out here, there is a feature out here. You have to go through pages. You have to flip through pages. So every user interface, navigation, etc., is very different. So they came out with the clever idea that we should actually introduce a voice-based help, which can actually guide the user step by step into completing an activity, right? And that is how Genie was born as a startup, right? Just two people thought of this idea, thought of their mom, and thought about how she could use any app in this world, and what would it take to actually do that, right? And I'm very proud to say that Genie today is working with Geo as well in multiple apps of ours. And so, that's what it takes. It takes you to just take a step back and think about what are the personal problems that you can solve. And you don't need to necessarily know coding, right? You need to, you can bring any expertise, like I said, to the table. And it could be even a business expertise, but it's something that you can at least start with, right? And the reason I'm talking about this is because I think largely the people who are attending this session and all of you out here are interested in understanding how to start a startup, right? As opposed to how to grow a startup. You're taking a step back and trying to think through all these questions. Some of the common mistakes that I would say that people make is the act of doing a startup, right? So what do I mean by doing the act of doing a startup? So one is, things like, company registration, spending time on finding office space, spending time on finding the right furniture for your office, things like that. See, these are all ancillary activities. This is not the main activity of doing a startup, right? What is the main activity of doing a startup? The focus on getting a customer. That is the only thing that matters, right? And you have to know your customer extremely well. You have to live the life of your customer. If you're not a customer of your own product, you have to live the life of a customer. So, for example, if you're doing, just as a hypothetical example, a GPS tracker for a trucking company, you have to actually, immerse yourself, and you could possibly try and do that. You could immerse yourself into the problem of a truck driver by actually driving a truck for 30 days and experiencing the pain firsthand and seeing if really the truck driver has any pain at all that you're solving, right? Unless you go down to that level, you will never know what pain customers are facing, right? So you have to feel the pain of your customer, and you have to know your product really well. So, for example, a couple of weeks back, Bhavish Agarwal, who's the founder CEO of Ola, was here in our campus and he gave a talk. And one of the questions that somebody asked in the audience is, do you ever go into an Ola cab? And he says that I don't own a car at all. I only drive in Ola. That's it. I don't own a car. And in Bangalore, he said that that's a boon because you anyway find it very difficult to navigate traffic and find parking. And he said that I've come to this venue in an Ola, right? So he said that this helps me understand my own product better. It helps me understand what the driver is thinking about, what the experience is like of going around in Ola, etc. So you have to really, really know your product very well after you build it, and the only way to do it is to experience that as a customer, right? So that sort of brings me to an end of this particular question, which is how do you find a problem, how do you find an idea, right? So I'm just going to do a quick recap of this particular question in the interest of the audience. One is that find an expertise or find something that really, really matters to you. I gave the example of Larry Page having expertise in search, Sachin and Binny Bansal having expertise in e-commerce. Figuring out, what you can do with that expertise as a side project. And one of the benefits, again, just to recap, of doing a side project, as opposed to saying that, okay, I'm going to start a startup today and building expectations in this world from your family, from your friends, from your boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, whatever. Instead of doing that, stay in stealth mode, under the radar, and start it as a side project, like Jan Kumar of WhatsApp did, right? And then see where it goes, right? The second thing is to find a problem that you're facing yourself. The example of Genie, where he actually thought of an idea of building a voice-based user interface and a user navigation tool based on the problem that his mom was facing, right? So that's the other way of going about it. And once you've done that, you have to live the life of your customer. And you have to know your product very well. So that's the end of that part. I'd like to move on to the next question that was asked, which is how to get money to build my startup, right? That's the next obvious question. And one of the things that I have truly enjoyed watching, I think it is on Netflix, which is Shark Tank. I think Shark Tank really gives you a very, very deep insight in terms of how investors think. And a lot of people feel that, oh, it's just a show, but it is a show where these investors have actually put in money in these ventures, and these ventures have done well. And I think what I found interesting is that every shark has his or her own expertise that they bring to the table. And a Silicon Valley shark is very different from the rest of the America shark, which is also a very apparent difference. But it at least gives you an insight in terms of how traditional investors think. If they want to put in, if they think that they're going to put in, $100,000 in your, or 1 crore in your company, then they have to be able to see how much money they're going to get back. If they are not able to visualize that, it is very difficult for them to put money in your company, right? So I think, having said that, Shark Tank is a good show and one can learn from it, I'd like to give you the following sort of guidelines. So first is that, and because most of you are students, unless it is your parents' money, the idea is to triple the investment for any investor that puts in money in it, right? That is a general thumb rule. So therefore, you have to take investor money with caution, right? It is always better to grow your business with customers' money. If you touch investors' money, you have to commit to actually at least tripling their money within a certain period of time. What that time is something that is between you all and the investors. But that is the only motivation for investors, other than your parents, right? Everybody else who puts in money in your company wants to triple their money. They want to earn more than what they would get by putting that money into mutual funds, for example, right? 15-20% return is not good. They want to make 30% annual return by putting in money in your company. And that's the only reason why even friends will put in money, because they want to see a return back at some point in time. They, of course, want to help you because they like you and they believe in you, they trust. They've seen that you do a good job of managing a business, or that you have the potential to manage a really big business. But end of the day, that's what they're thinking about. How can I get my money back and thrice the amount? So imagine yourself actually giving dividend payouts to investors over 3 years, which would at least double their investment as a thumb rule, right? So the way to think about it is, you have to ask yourself, can I make enough money that after paying my salaries and other operating expenses and making sure that I have a budget to invest in the future of my business, and after paying myself, do I have enough money left to issue a dividend to my investors over the next 3 years, which can at least double their money or triple their money, right? And if the answer is no, you need to take a step back and think what kind of business you're getting into and why you need investor money at all, right? Um, I think a lot of people think that uh, investors are ready to fund losses because a lot of such examples one can see in the ecosystem. But I would look at the whole period of 2011 to 17 when a lot of this investment happened in India as a way to seed the ecosystem, to get the ecosystem going, right? Whether it is e-commerce or whether it is mobile payments, whether it is any other technology space. But generally speaking, now investors are very clear on how they want to get their money back with a healthy return and within a certain period of time. So, what are the things that attract investors, early investors, right? Because we are really talking about friends, family, and then angel investors, right? So, the first thing that matters to them is a growth curve, is a very, very healthy growth curve. They need to see new customer signups. They need to see old customer retention. They need to see repeat business, and they need to see a very clear path to profitability. If you can show a curve that is going up like this, right, that's the only thing that impresses an investor. So you need to do well. You need to put your head down and grow your customers, grow your revenue, and show a clear path to profitability. Nothing else matters. You can come in and you can present, a great team, which is great because I'm putting my money behind a great team. But you can talk to me about an earth-shattering idea, about rocket science, about anything else. But the only thing that I will focus on is that one curve that is going like this. And that is the only reason why I will give you money, right? So I cannot, emphasize this point more because I've seen this repeatedly even in our program, where investors come with that expectation that startups need to start showing those kind of growth curves. So I just want to kind of recap the points that I made in how to get money. So one is Shark Tank is a great show. Do see that if you've not seen it already. It gives you an insight into the mind of a shark, of an investor, right? Secondly, unless it's your parents, the general thumb rule is triple the money for your investors, right? Whoever they are, right? Even if they are friends, they will believe you, they will trust you, but they will give you money only if you can triple it for them, right? Imagine yourself giving dividends to these investors over 2 to 3 years, where they can at least double or triple that money. That is extremely important. Think in dividend terms. Don't think in terms of exits to larger investors, right? That is the way to build their confidence. And the last thing is that only growth curves matter to investors, right? You need to be able to show new customer signups. You need to show customer retention, repeat business, and you need to show a clear path to profitability. These are the only things that matter. And don't believe anyone who tells you that, investors will invest in loss-making businesses. Don't believe a word of anybody who says that to you. It's not true. Again, who can be early investors in your business? These could be friends and family. These could be, because they trust you and they like you. These could be angel investors. These could be angel networks. These could be high net worth individuals. But people who understand your business, that's very important. Like, don't go and raise money from investors who absolutely have no idea, but just say that, okay, you know what, I don't understand your business, but here is the money. Or I'm a real estate guy, or I'm a builder. Here is money. Give me back a return after 2 to 3 years, etc. These people don't understand potentially a technology business. They might understand a real estate business, or they might understand some other business connected to their industry. So try and find investors who understand your business extremely well. The minute you start talking about it, they get it. And you should be able to see that on their face. Otherwise, I would not touch anybody else's money. And hopefully, a lot of you will actually start startups and come to us for help. We'll be happy to look at you as an accelerator program. So that kind of brings me to an end of my brief remarks. I would love to open this up for questions because I truly believe that that is the best way to actually have a more interactive discussion and learn more from each other. Thank you. Yeah. Where do I go for questions? Yep.
You'll be reading out their questions.
Yes, yes. I will read out their questions, but I don't see any questions so far.
Yeah, you all can ask questions. I'm sure you would have some questions. Any question relating to startups, of course.
There was this point mentioned that we should do some audit projects at the start. The startup idea is project. Right, so is it like do it on the small scale or something else?
Yeah, so do it on a small scale. Do it in stealth mode. Don't build a lot of expectations that you're doing a startup. Call it a project and treat it as an experiment. That could fail, right? And the reason why I suggest that is because a lot of times people declare to the world that they're doing a startup, and a lot of expectations are built around doing it from the ecosystem. And if you are on that path, sometimes a lot of that pressure can actually build up and deviate your attention from what really matters, which is to focus on the customer and win the customer, right? So rather than calling it a startup, call it a project. But work with customers. The day that project actually succeeds in terms of serving the need of multiple customers, right? You can actually go and start a startup. So think about Google, right? Google was started by two PhD students under the guidance of their PhD advisor, and they built it within Stanford University as a university project, right? There were other search engines in the industry, but it's only when they started seeing the growth in Google that they actually decided to start a company and raise money for it, right? So something that starts in stealth mode as a side project, like even the WhatsApp example that I gave you, right? That it was an observation, and it was something that he probably wanted to do for himself, which is to know who in his address book is available, busy, has gone out to the gym, whose battery is low, etc. So he started off that way, and then over a period of time, it became a messenger, right? So it kind of the day it starts scaling, that is the time that you actually know, or when customers start liking it and start using it, that's when you know that this is a startup, right? So yes, you have to experiment at a small scale first and see if it works, and only if it works, then convert it into a startup. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of questions here. Okay, so one of the questions is how to decide the price of your product. So the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is very simple, that the customer decides the price of the product. So just ask the customer how much would you pay for it.
Yeah.
How to tackle the risk factor for any project? I think there is no single answer to this question. I think the best answer to this question that I can think of right now is that know the risk first. If you know the risk, you know what to tackle. Write down the risks. A lot of us actually don't write down what are the risks that our startup faces. Right? We just assume that this could be a risk in some generic terms. Right? For example, I could be facing a recession next year, and therefore this business would go belly up. Now, that's not a very well thought through risk, right? Any business faces recession, right? But what part of a recession will actually impact your business is something that is very important to understand. So, therefore, defining the risk is very important. Listing down risks is very important. Feasibility of backup plans. I'm not sure what that question is, but if the question is that should you have a backup plan when you're doing a startup, there is no plan B. If you have a plan B, plan A will not work.
You can do that parallel to a job or like in case you're trying out on a small scale.
Backup to the project that fails.
Uh,
I mean, is the question that
Backup to the project as it which you are just checking whether it will work. As you have suggested, every startup idea should be tried on a small scale.
Mhm.
So that can be done as a backup. Means the job can be done as a backup in that case. Or it should be done independently.
no. Actually, see the way to think about it is, and this is a very, I mean, it's a good question. So the question is, should I do a project uh, with a backup of a job in mind, of taking up a job in mind? That's the question,
Parallel to it.
or parallel to a job. The thing is that if the project is not exciting you enough to pursue it to its fullest extent, even if it is a side project, you will never succeed at it. So if you're just treating it as a part-time project, uh, not really thinking about it as a business, but really thinking about it as the project should be successful with the end goal having been met. If you're not working at it with that in mind, then it's very difficult to make it into a company. And if you have a job at the back of your mind, um, it's a difficult fight to fight. Okay. What is the difference between promoting startups and mass entrepreneurship? I'm not sure what that question means. Does anybody know what that means? No investor will invest until your project is a great idea for them, great deal for them. So how do you plan the project that attracts the investors? So this is a question that I've already answered, which is that the only thing that can get them interested are growth curves. There is nothing else that attracts investors. How can we determine that a startup is successful or failure? I think this is where instinct matters a lot. Instinct of yourself and your friends, or colleagues or co-founders that are there in your business. Uh, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs after many years are are struggling quite a bit with their enterprise, but refuse to give up. Um, that's because that's the only thing that they've done all their life, and they feel that it will succeed at some point. And there is always something that's going to happen next year, and all this we had to go through this journey, but now we are at a point where now next year is going to take off and stuff like that. But you have to be realistic as well. There is no straight answer to this question, and it's a very hard decision to call it a failure. Extremely hard decision. But you have to trust your gut and instinct, and you have to think about, what does the future hold, and if your business has any future, and take a call. There is no scientific way of knowing whether a venture is successful or a failure. There are many ventures that have come out of bankruptcy. By the way, there's a company called Nvidia, if you heard, and Nvidia actually was close to filing for bankruptcy twice, I think. And today it's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and it is just sheer gut and determination, instinct that kept the founder going. So it all depends. It's all case-to-case basis. How many partners are advisable in a startup? I don't know. Depends on, generally speaking, there are ventures where, like for example, Google has had two founders, very successful. Three is also a good number. Four is a tricky number because you could have two camps that are created within the startup. Five and more is like just too much. Single founder is almost a very difficult situation because you definitely need somebody to rely on when you're building a startup, because it's a very hard, lonely journey. Nobody understands you except for your co-founder, and therefore, if you're on it alone, it's a double hard journey, and I wouldn't advise it at all. You need to have co-founders. Hello, sir. Should we invest the seed capital or find investors for it? Is the question, should I invest my own money or find investors for it? Invest your own money as long as you can before you bring in an external investor, because like I said, if you touch investor money, then you have to triple their money. So that's additional pressure. And you would rather keep all the equity to yourself than give it to other investors. But I mean, if the capital is needed, then it's needed, right? What is the success rate of startups in India? Well, I think there is no geographical rate of success for startups. The general thumb rule that investors use is out of 10 startups, 3 will succeed, 3 will be moderately successful, and 4 will fail. And the 3 that are moderately successful are the most dangerous ones because they always give you the illusion that they're going to succeed. And sometimes they could just be living dead. And they just continue burning cash, but there's no success that way. But typically 20 to 30% would succeed. But that's like, that's anybody's guess. There's no real number for this. When it comes to investors, is it possible to convince them only by growth curve at a very early stage? Yes, you must. You cannot just raise money based on future potential. You have to show that something is working, and it could be a few customers also, but you have to show a weekly increase in the number of customers that you're talking to, who are getting interested, who are coming to your pipeline, who are warming up to your idea, who are trying you out, who are then eventually buying a product. You have to show some growth on the customer front, and that's the easiest way to get investors. Otherwise, it's selling a lot of stories to investors, which is very, very hard. It's uphill, right? So you'd rather focus on this side, which is to work very hard with your customers. How do I seek attention of the customers? I don't have an answer to that idea question. It depends. I don't know. Does anybody have an answer to that question?
For that, you will have to market it properly, your product to the target customer.
Yes,
that
but
is the only thing that you can create awareness about your product or service in your customer.
Yep, yeah, that's one answer. Any other answer? Sorry?
find their needs.
Find the
or-
needs and
Find their needs and solve it. Great answer. How to make the idea viral? How to reach the first 100 customers? Well, the idea is viral or not. You can't make it viral, right? So, how did, for example, how did Snapchat become viral? Inherently, there has to be some network effect for any of these startups to go viral, right? Facebook, how did it go viral? They basically grew out of university campuses, right? And there was a network effect because if I got onto Facebook, I would expect others to be on Facebook, and that would lead others to get on Facebook, which would lead others to get on Facebook. So it was like a network effect that happened due to which it went viral on its own. There is no money that you can spend on making things viral. It's just not how it works. Then, how to decide salaries of employees? Well, I don't know. Ask them how much they want. Is joint venture a good option for a new startup? Yeah, I don't understand this question. Tips on surviving failure. Yes, surviving failure. That's a very good one. I think, and this is what some people call the cockroach strategy, I think. The cockroach strategy is to actually just keep surviving and survive long enough for you to start succeeding. And there are startups that I know that have survived for 10 years before they actually start seeing some real growth in their business. And this is especially true in B2B businesses. A lot of them just have to survive for a very long time until they start growing rapidly at some point. And once you overcome the fear of failure, you have the fear of success. Because then you have to start proving to your customers that you're really worth betting on. When you have fear of failure, you're basically doing everything that you can to just survive. But once you start growing, then there is fear of success as well, right? So I think the fear of failure is just fear of success is just as important as fear of failure. But yeah, I mean, there are no like tips on surviving failure. You just have to, keep your costs extremely low and keep your focus extremely clear on customers. And you have, sorry, go ahead.
About that earlier question, how much salary should be given? So, is it advisable to give some part of like equity to that employee because that will create a motivation within him that I should be working because I have also some percent.
Yes, yes. ESOP is a very good idea at an early stage, and that is always better than giving cash to employees. Absolutely, and that way they are more bought into your success. Right?
Then how should we quantify how much of the percentage that will be?
Actually, that depends. Depends on the role that that person is playing. So sometimes, if it is a critical role, then you have to compensate enough through equity, which is something that can be anything from a significant minority, like 5 to 10%, 15%, going up to 1/3 of the company, depending on the contribution of that person. But if there are many employees and you want to compensate many of them through ESOP, then generally speaking, anything from 10 to 15% is set aside for employee stock options by most startups. Okay, how successful can a startup related to arts or culture be in India? Yeah, I have no idea of this area. How important is digital marketing while early stage of startup? Digital marketing is important but very expensive because today Google and Facebook typically would you would end up spending like anywhere from 500 rupees to 1,000 rupees on one customer acquisition. which is very expensive, and then you have to make money on that customer, and then you will lose that customer because typically in B2C or even B2B2C, the retention, the drop rates are quite high, right? You end up spending 1,000 rupees on one customer, and then you end up losing 40, 50, 60% of them, right? So it's unless you're like super rich and you are able to fund yourself at that stage, it's very difficult. I wouldn't advise it. I think the best way to grow is organically through word of mouth and not by spending on digital marketing, at least in the early stages. Yeah.
If you are the first mover in a particular industry or service and you're doing well, and some big pocketed firm comes in and like
Disrupts,
drives your
yeah.
customers towards them, then what should be done? How to tackle that situation?
Can you give me an example of this having happened? So the question is, just to repeat it to the audience, that if you're doing your startup and a larger player comes and disrupts your market, how do you react to it? Right? Is there any example that you can think of where a larger company came and disrupted a small startup's market?
For example, Ola and Uber. So Uber came in with like really low prices for the same journey than Ola, and then Ola had to go to government and say this is happening, like they should be banned or something like that. It was in the year of 2016 this had happened that Ola was facing some problems because of Uber, and they were in the talks with the government so that this should not be happening. Like you're promoting Indian startups and still we are not getting so much of money. Like it was hurting their business.
Yeah, I
Due
understand.
to Uber.
I understand. So first of all, I don't look at Ola as a small company. Ola is a significant player, and even when this happened, Ola was the only other player in India apart from Uber, and also significant at that point in time. So it wasn't a small startup in that sense.
Right.
Generally speaking, large companies have other challenges and problems on hand, and I don't think that they're thinking day in and day out about how startups can disrupt their life. They're in fact thinking about how to invest in them, how to acquire them, right? I think a lot of startups are born out of problems that entrepreneurs who are working in these large organizations see as not being solved, and therefore step out of that organization, start a startup around it, right? And in many cases, like it happens in Silicon Valley, these larger enterprises end up buying these startups, and that cycle continues. So, I generally don't think startups should be worried about larger players disrupting the space. I think the startup should only worry about whether the customers are satisfied or not, and are they paying them on time or not. That's the only thing that matters. And if you keep your focus laser sharp just on customers, I don't think you have to worry about anything else. Really, I think this whole thing about larger players coming and disrupting you is all theory, and I've not seen it in the last 100 companies that we worked with. I've not seen a single large player having come and disrupted any of the startup. The startup has actually not worked out because of some other problem other than larger players coming and disrupting.
What I was thinking, like Ola was a big player, that's why they survived. If had it been Taxi for Sure, for example, and had it not been they acquired by the Ola, so how would things have been? Like,
So Taxi for Sure was already acquired by Ola,
right.
And this whole thing happened much later, right? But I see your point. What you're saying is that, for example, let's take another industry, right? Let's say movie tickets, right? So Book My Show is the dominant one out there, and then Paytm also started it. But Paytm was not a small company; it was big. But in movie tickets, it was new, but it had the users, right? I think it's generally speaking the other way around, where a big player in an area is occupying a very important space, and a small player is trying to come and create room for itself. That is a bigger problem than a startup having, identified a space in the early stages. A big company notices it and goes after it, because at that stage, when you're small, the market opportunity for a larger player seems very small until it grows very big. So, for example, you look at WhatsApp and Facebook, right? Why did Facebook buy WhatsApp for $19 billion? Right? Because WhatsApp was, in some sense, an opportunity and a threat for Facebook. Right? You think about it. But if Facebook had seen WhatsApp in its early days, when it was small, it probably would have said, okay, TK, there is an app that's growing. But we are much larger with Messenger and with our social network. Right? It's only when they started growing much faster and much bigger that they came on the radar. Right? So I think this question is very nuanced, and I don't think I've seen a startup going out of business because a larger player came and tried to occupy that space. Okay, so I'm just going to select some questions now, because a lot of them are just feel like the same type of questions. How to avoid ideas getting copied instead of patenting the idea? So I think the question is, I don't want to patent the idea, but I want to avoid it from being copied. So generally speaking, there are ideas that should be patented, need to be patented. But I think the biggest uniqueness that you can bring to the table is in how your customers are happy with you, right? And that can't be patented at all. So I wouldn't get so hung up about ideas getting copied, right? Again, you have to see how that idea actually is working for the customer. So what is innovation, right? Innovation is the successful exploitation of a new idea. You have to successfully commercially exploit a new idea for it to be, valuable, right? And that should be the focus, as opposed to, oh, I have an idea, I don't want to, get it copied, I don't want to patent it also. Right? Nobody will notice that idea also if it's not in the market, right? So once it gets into the market, then you have to defend yourself, obviously. But then it comes down to how you can retain your customers. That's all that matters. Right? When should we consider the option of buyout by another company? That's a good question. So generally speaking, when you think that you're not going to be able to independently grow in a market, and you hit some kind of a roadblock, whether it is in terms of investor money, whether it is in terms of market opportunity is not as big as you thought it was, or some other dynamics in the market, and you have certain intellectual property, you have certain business operations, you have a good team that you can offer, that is a good time to actually think of a buyout. And there are different types of buyouts. So there are buyouts like acqui-hires, what they call, right? So an acqui-hire is really just a team. So a larger player is just interested in the team, is not interested in your business, because they can take that team, plug it into one of their own businesses, which is growing much faster and much bigger, right? So that is known as an acqui-hire, right? And that's the dominant model of acquisition that one can see in the startup ecosystem, right? Then you're looking at an acquisition, which is the acquisition of a team plus a product and a business, right? There is also, another level, which is just the team and the product. So you also build a good product, you have some intellectual property that I'm interested in, and I would value both the team and the product and then buy it. And then there is the team, product, and the business, right? And when I say business, It's actually cash flow generating business, which is slightly higher priced because obviously, you are running a business successfully. The only thing is that you're going to hit a roadblock, or you think that you want to cash out, or the investors want to cash out, and that you've run enough, you're tired, there is fatigue, you don't want to run it anymore. You're happy, being inside a larger company, and for that larger company to take it to the next level. So there are different types of buyouts. When you should consider an acquisition, only when you've proven something in the market, not before that. If you just start a startup and build a product and say that, hey, you know what, I'm a team with a great product, come buy my company, it's not going to happen. Because buyers want to see that you have successfully put that product into customers' hands. Customers are happy with it and buying more from you. That is a real proof of, your business missing, right? So that's when you're actually valuable. So I would say that, go only when you can't independently keep growing, and go when you think that your startup is better housed inside a larger company than it is independently, right? How to tackle a competitive market when we think of having a startup? I don't think, I think this whole word of competition at a startup stage is overdone and overanalyzed. I think people make comparisons with other companies only because they like to have this mental idea that there is something like this exists already, and therefore if I study that, I will understand you. But it's really, I don't think that one should excessively worry about competitiveness at an early stage. Like I said, if your user is happy with you more and sticks with you, you have a competitive advantage already. And competitive advantage comes only out after, only through that, and it doesn't come by looking at competition and reacting to it. If you're constantly looking at competition and reacting to it, then you would never be able to build your startup. Because then it's like, like I told you earlier, that it's like going and finding an office space. It's an ancillary activity, looking at competition. And it shouldn't be the core focus. Yeah, go ahead.
So what do you say about franchising business? Like McDonald's give franchises to others.
Yeah.
And so, for example, even I can take that after college and start doing it for McDonald's. So, what would be the requirements from my side, and what they will be looking at, and what are the steps involved? I want to know something in detail.
So first of all, I don't find franchising as a startup opportunity, because you're not really creating a brand for yourself, and you're not creating disproportionate growth opportunities for yourself. It's like it's an unscalable business in some sense, because you would be owning an outlet and you would be operating that outlet until the master brand allows you to operate in that market for them, right? So it's a small medium business and it's not a startup. There is a difference.
Okay. So when I treat it like a fixed income business, like if somebody is happy with just a small outlet, I want to have normal income. So can you go ahead?
Why not? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But it's nothing but, yeah. So for example, and for the lack of a better example, take a barber shop, right? And Paul Graham has actually written about it in one of his essays, and you should definitely read about the difference between a startup and your regular sort of small medium small businesses of the kind that you're talking about. It's not a barber shop is something that depends on the skill of the person who's running that shop, right? It's not replicable. The same barber can't be in 10 outlets at the same time. The barber has to be in that shop to be able to do the job well, right? And so therefore, it's not a scalable business, right? So if you're thinking about building a scalable business, then becoming a franchise for a larger company where you're owning one outlet, which you are running yourself, is not a great idea. But if you're thinking about building a big business, right, then you have to think about it like a startup. And you have to look at disproportionate growth, right, which is replicable. If we want to join a startup as an employee, what should we seek in that startup? That's a fair question, right? Not everybody should start a startup. Somebody should work for it also. I think the ESOP. Somebody suggested ESOP. You suggested ESOP. So I think ESOP is very important because why would you take a job at a startup as opposed to a larger company, right? Because they provide you some growth opportunities that the larger company doesn't, and that is ESOP. So that's the only thing that I would look for. And of course, I mean, are they operating in a hot market? How good are the founders? What is their background? Are they founders that we can trust? Do they have integrity? So you need to do a bit of due diligence on the founders as well before you consider joining the startup, right? And you should also see whether they are well funded to be able to sort of continue growing. Right? Well funded either by customers or by investors. So just to clarify. Is a job experience for a few years recommended before directly going for a startup? Yes and no. Sachin and Binny Bansal worked for Amazon for a few years before they started e-commerce. And hence that allowed them to develop expertise in doing e-commerce. And therefore it mattered. So if you want to build expertise, yes, you have to look at experience. Experience also matters in areas like B2B, where you're exposed to a certain area, you understand problems inside a larger company, which you can step out as a startup and start solving. But it's not always necessary because the more experience you get, the more confined you become in your ways, and you start thinking the standard industry way, right? This can't be done kind of way. So be careful. Don't spend too much time getting experience. Get optimal experience and then start immediately after that. How to decide between targeting a niche consumer base while retaining originality and changing your product to fit a larger generic customer base? I think the answer to this question could be possibly that if it is serving a small consumer base initially, does your startup allow you to replicate it for a larger consumer base from a cost perspective, right? So are you able to maintain the same quality for a larger consumer base? And what are you doing to maintain the same quality? Because in the end, what happens is that when you go from small to big, sometimes you lose quality. And that's what impacts your reputation as a company, right? So for example, if I am a cab aggregator and I'm working in Navi Mumbai, and I'm personally involved and meeting all the drivers on a daily basis to make sure they're motivated enough to drive my cab every day in the morning and switch on Ola every morning, then I would probably run a very efficient business in a very inefficient way, because I would be on the ground trying to make this happen every day. But the minute I go into larger Mumbai, right, and I'm not physically available to do that anymore, the quality could drop. And hence the question is, how do you maintain consistency between serving a small consumer base to a larger consumer base? And that is where I think technology plays a huge role. You have to leverage technology to be able to scale. Otherwise, it's impossible to scale, right? So I would just leave it at that. Yeah, I think we've pretty much exhausted all the questions. So, Nafis wants me to give a brief summary at the end. So I will just say this that I think doing a startup is a lot of fun. It requires a lot of determination. Um, Start small, think big, um, and join an accelerator like Geogen Next. All right, I think we should end it here, if that's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So we did talk about showing the procurement going for it. So this is in the case where you have already made the product and now we are into the market. But what if you want investment for making means making out or making the idea into a product?
So, so one is, fund it yourself as much as you can. So one is that, find out how much it will cost. Number one. Number two is, are you doing this alone? I wouldn't advise doing it alone. I would advise getting other co-founders. Then go to friends and family and see if you can sell them that idea, right? Because they would give you some seed capital. Typically, every startup starts with a friends and family round, right? And then go to angels only when you've been able to show some traction, right? That's the ideal path. That doesn't mean that you can't go with a PowerPoint presentation to an investor and try and convince the investor. All I'm saying is that the investor will be less convinced about your idea when you just go with a PowerPoint presentation. See, one thing is that I think we feel that investors are like know-it-all experts, but actually investors don't know much of anything. It's the entrepreneur's job to educate the investor about the market opportunity, about the potential of the startup, right? And if you're able to do that just on PowerPoint presentation, great. But most investors would like to see a proof of concept, however small it is, a prototype, something that shows them that this thing can work for customers, right? Otherwise, it's very difficult. So tweak your idea to something that requires a very minimal capital in the beginning, right, to prove, and then go to investors. That's my general sort of advice. But of course, I mean, there are exceptions. If you need capital and you just can't, take it out of your head and put it into a physical product without investor capital, then you have to go for it. But I would generally advise the other option.
So can you share any startup that has come to GenNext in an early stage so that you can just get an idea of what helps them get into?
Sure. So I think I talked about Genie. So Genie was in our sixth or seventh cohort. I think one of those. And again, a two-person startup, Kushagra and Sahil. They had built a prototype, and they were talking to a small few startups to buy the product. And they came here, and they had a very compelling idea, which I talked about earlier, which is to provide voice-based navigation inside an app, right? And we thought that this can work inside Jio, right? So we actually pitched them to Jio, and Jio liked the idea, and they did a proof of concept. After doing the proof of concept, our management from Jio actually thought that this can be rolled out through Jio's apps, and now they're in that phase where it's getting rolled out. But the important part of the journey was to actually look at multiple aspects of their business, right? Because it was only a product at that point in time, started by two people, extremely talented people, had an open mind, they wanted to learn. So the first thing that they had to learn about is, how to find a fitment with a customer for the product, because they had to find a large enough use case where it actually led to some tangible outcome for the customer, right? So can my voice-based navigation actually improve my engagement metrics tangibly, right? And if it has the potential or the promise to do that, then I'm willing to try it out, right? And their entire mentoring our entire mentoring effort was centered around that. And so there were, workshops around going to market. There were workshops around the product roadmap and what features to build that can meet the customer's requirement. There were workshops around how to raise money from investors. There were workshops around, how do you manage your stakeholders, right? There were networking events that they participated in. So it is, I would say that, it's a 3 to 4 months journey. And the idea was to take their prototype and prove it in the context of a large customer. And having proven that, now they are, growing quite well. From the first batch, we have a company called Loginext, which is doing extremely well. They received an investment from Paytm as well in the early days, and India Angel Network. And they are basically building India's, which we like to think of as India's largest logistics software platform that will be used by all last mile logistics companies. So they're growing extremely well, both in India and abroad. They're highly valued by investors. I can't give you a number, but they've grown like more than, I would say, 100x from the time that they entered our first batch 4 years back. So, so those are 2 examples. I can keep going, but okay, should we? I'll just say thanks to everyone.